Imagine being born into a world of just pitch black and freezing cold, and you're told from your very first breath that your only purpose in life is to guard a door you can never, ever open.
Right, like a literal generational nightmare.
Exactly. And all the while, the universe's most horrifying monsters are constantly, relentlessly clawing at the walls outside, trying to get in. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are looking at a faction from the 41st millennium that takes this whole concept of stubbornness, strips away all the glory, and just turns it into an absolute horror show.
Yeah, we are unpacking the Urani Searcher Regulates, or the URSR as they're often called.
Right, the URSR. This is a league of kin who endure a level of horror that is, frankly, hard to even conceptualize. And they aren't doing it for wealth. They aren't doing it for conquest.
No, not at all. They're doing it to protect a secret so profoundly important it could rewrite the entire history of the galaxy.
It really is wild. It's the ultimate grimdark manifestation of a noble duty just completely curdling into a suffocating burden.
It really is. When you examine the URSR, you are looking at a complete inversion of what we typically expect from the Leagues of Votan. I mean, we know the kin is pragmatic.
Oh, absolutely. Hyper-efficient resource gatherers.
Exactly. If a mining operation or, a territorial hold becomes mathematically unprofitable, a standard league will just pack up their clone skeins and their mining ships and move on.
Because they are survivors. They do the math.
Right, they do the math.
Yeah.
But the Urani Searcher Regulates are not pragmatic fortune seekers. They are unyielding sentinels who have willingly chained themselves to a post they can never leave.
Which is what we're getting into today. Our mission for this deep dive is to completely deconstruct the mechanics of their survival. We have to look at the geopolitical logistics of their endless war, the psychological toll of their lifestyle, and the tragic irony of the sleeping god they are hiding in the dark.
I think we really need to start with the sheer logistics of it.
Yeah, I want you listening to really internalize the absurdity of what they're doing. Let's say you are, I don't know, the sole caretaker of a crumbling, highly targeted fortress.
Yeah, I like this analogy.
Right. Every single day, a new disaster strikes. The local government is trying to bulldoze the East Wing. A cartel is actively trying to storm the front gate. A swarm of termites is eating the foundation.
Which is just a completely unsustainable situation.
Right. Anyone else in their right mind would call it a day, hand over the keys, and walk away. But instead of leaving, you just turn down the thermostat in your room to near freezing, you start eating half a ration of food a day, you board up the windows, and you just sit on the basement stairs with a shotgun.
Just waiting in the dark. Forever.
Forever! That is the Urani Searcher Regulates in a nutshell.
The fortress analogy is incredibly apt, honestly, especially when you consider the actual geographic reality of their borders.
Yeah.
To understand the sheer scale of their stubbornness, you first have to understand the geopolitical nightmare of their location.
Yeah, let's talk about where they actually are.
So the URSR's territory is situated in the southern reaches of the galactic core.
Which, just to set the baseline for everyone listening, is already one of the most hostile environments in the universe.
Without a doubt.
The galactic core is basically a navigational blender. You have supermassive black holes, lethal radiation storms, gravity wells that will tear a cruiser in half. I mean, it is a terrible place to live on a good day.
Exactly. The environment itself is actively trying to kill you before anyone even fires a shot. But the environmental hazards are really the least of the URSR's concerns.
Because of the neighbors.
Right, the neighbors. Because they have somehow managed to carve out their territory in this hyper-contested zone where they are currently fighting a four-front war.
Four fronts. Which is insane.
And these aren't border skirmishes, We're talking about four distinct apocalyptic-level threats that are constantly hammering against their outer hold worlds.
The logistics of maintaining even a single front against any one of these factions would bankrupt most planetary defense forces. But they're fighting all four.
Simultaneously, without giving an inch of ground.
Let's actually break down these four fronts, because when you list them out, it sounds like a sick joke. Let's start with the northern border, or, well, wherever the equivalent is in the core. They are fighting the Necron-Samnok dynasty.
And the intelligence on this specifically notes that the Samnok dynasty is newly awakened.
Yeah, newly awakened, which is a huge distinction.
That specific phrase, newly awakened, it completely changes the entire mathematical equation of the war. We all know the Necrons. Ancient, soulless, metallic androids with technology that basically borders on localized reality warping.
Right.
But there is a massive difference between fighting a Necron splinter force that has been active for millennia and fighting a dynasty that is right in the middle of its initial reanimation protocols.
Because a newly awakened Tomb World isn't just sending out like a quick reading party to test the waters.
No, not at all.
It is executing a completely sterile, system-wide extermination program. It's a cold reboot of a genocide machine.
Precisely. When a dynasty like the Samnok first wakes up, their central command nodes are hyper-focused on securing their immediate stellar neighborhood.
They just want everything cleared out.
Right, they are expanding outward with mathematical, unfeeling precision. For a URSR commander, fighting this front is a nightmare of pure attrition.
You can't outthink them or negotiate.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
Necrons don't have supply lines. You can't starve them out. You can't break their morale.
You hit a phalanx of Necron warriors with ion fire, they fall down, and then what? The reanimation protocols stitch their living metal back together, and they literally just stand right back up.
It's exhausting just to think about. Defending against the Samnok dynasty requires a relentless, punishing expenditure of heavy ordnance, plasma, and sheer kinetic force just to vaporize the metal faster than it can rebuild itself.
So you have silent, methodical, resurrecting death marching in lockstep on one side of your empire. You are pouring billions of joules of energy into plasma batteries just to hold them back.
And that's just Tuesday on the Northern Front.
Right. And while your logistical networks are screaming under the strain of that mathematical nightmare, the klaxons start blaring on your eastern flank. Because here come the orc fleets.
Specifically, the raiding fleets under Bogda Freebooter King.
Which is just the absolute antithesis of the Necron threat. If the Necrons are a scalpel, the orcs are a rusty hammer wrapped in barbed wire.
That is a perfect way to put it. And the fact that these are freebooters, orc pirates, makes the tactical situation incredibly volatile.
Right, because freebooters aren't necessarily trying to conquer a planet to build a stable empire. They aren't trying to govern.
No, they are in it for the loot, the scrap, and the sheer intoxicating thrill of violence. They are completely unpredictable.
And that unpredictability is what makes a two-front war against both Necrons and orcs so uniquely devastating. The Kin military doctrine is built on efficiency, right? Overlapping fields of fire, rigid discipline.
Very rigid, yeah.
And that works relatively well when fighting the logical advance of the Necrons. But orc freebooters, they will strap macro cannons to a hollowed-out asteroid, paint it red so it goes faster, and slam it directly into a URSR orbital defense platform just for the fun of it.
Literally just for a laugh. They will launch mass boarding actions, dropping billions of screaming, fungus-based berserkers right into the Kin trench lines.
The physiological whiplash for a URSR general must be insane. I mean, think about it. You spend 12 hours analyzing the perfect trigonometric firing solution to counter a Necron monolith advance.
Right, pure math and logic.
And then you get a priority Vox transmission that 3 million orcs are currently trying to eat your eastern supply depots. You have to constantly shift your troops from a mindset of cold, calculated execution to a mindset of absolute, desperate, muddy brawling.
It stretches their command and control infrastructure to the absolute breaking point. You have logic on one side, chaos on the other, but as we know, the nightmare doesn't end there. We have to look at the third front.
Oh man, the third front, the Nostar cluster.
The Tyranid infestations.
And this is the part of the geographic reality that actually makes me shudder.
Right.
We all know what Tyranids are, the great devourer, the cosmic locust swarm.
The ultimate biological threat.
Yeah, but the intelligence reports regarding the Tyranids in the Nostar cluster detail something deeply anomalous. They exhibit, and this is a direct quote from the behavioral analysis in the source, strange, almost nesting behavior patterns.
Yeah, that single word nesting. It completely rewrites the strategic reality of the Tyranid threat.
It really does,
Yeah.
because the entire horror of the Tyranids is their mobility, right?
Exactly. A hive fleet enters a system, it strips every single biological molecule from a planet. Oceans, atmosphere, vegetation, defenders, and then the massive bioships move on to the next system, leaving nothing but barren rock.
They're an eternal moving wave of consumption.
But if they are nesting, they aren't moving on.
Right. If a hive fleet is nesting, it means the hive mind has identified something in the URSR's territory that is valuable enough to stop the eternal march.
They are fortifying. They are creating permanent biological beachheads. We are talking about capillary towers taking permanent root deep in the planetary crust.
Spawning pools just constantly churning out hyper-adapted bioforms specifically designed to counter kin technology on a permanent basis.
It's the difference between a swarm of killer hornets flying through your backyard and a swarm of killer hornets deciding to build a skyscraper-sized hive directly on top of your house.
That is a terrifying thought. It implies a long-term, entrenched biological war. The Tyranids are actively trying to terraform the physical space around the URSR.
So to combat this, the kin have to deploy massive amounts of chemical defoliants, radiation weaponry, and incendiaries just to burn out the encroaching biological corruption.
Which is a completely different logistical supply chain than fighting Necrons or Orcs.
Entirely different. You are fighting mathematical death on the north, unpredictable chaotic piracy on the east, and an entrenched, hyper-evolving biological infection on the south.
Any one of these threats warrants a full mobilization of the League's resources. Just one of them.
Absolutely.
Which makes the Fourth Front feel like a cosmic joke. Because on the western border, encroaching into their space, is the Black Templars' Morsius Crusade.
Oh yeah, the fanatical spearhead of the Imperium of Man.
The Black Templars are not your standard Space Marine chapter. They don't adhere to the Codex Astartes limits on numbers.
No, not at all. They're a massive, fleet-based crusade of genetically modified, heavily armored super soldiers driven entirely by religious zealotry.
To them, the galaxy is just binary. You are either a compliant servant of the God Emperor, or you are a heretic, a mutant, or an alien that must be purged in holy fire.
And the kin of the Leagues of Votann tick basically all the wrong boxes for a Black Templar.
All of them. The kin are clones, which borders on mutation. They are deeply reliant on artificial intelligence and ancient supercomputers, which is absolute tech heresy to the Imperium.
And they refuse to bow to Terra. So the Black Templars aren't showing up to negotiate trade routes. They're showing up to exterminate.
The presence of the Morsius Crusade introduces a deeply psychological warfare element to the siege that wasn't there with the others.
How so?
Well, you cannot demoralize a Necron. You can't out-fanatic a Tyranid. But the Black Templars bring a sheer, screaming hatred that requires brutal, grinding trench warfare and heavy anti-armor tactics.
That's a great point. They will launch drop pods directly into URSR population centers. They will fight block by block, room by room, with chainswords and bolters chanting hymns while they slaughter.
I really want to pause and synthesize this, because this is where I have to throw a massive flag on the play. We just described a four-front war against immortal robots, biological tidal waves, alien nesting grounds, and religious super soldiers.
It is absurd.
If you are surrounded by this absolute meat grinder, at what point does this stop being bravery and start being a suicidal sunk cost fallacy?
That is the big question.
Right. If you are a URSR commander looking at a map where literally every single border is on fire, why not just pack up the colony ships, break through the weakest line, maybe the Orcs, and just move?
Just run for it.
Yeah. The Galactic Core is huge. Go find an asteroid field where you only have to fight one apocalyptic threat.
It is the most rational question to ask, and it is the exact conclusion that every other League of Votann would reach.
Because they're practical.
Exactly. The kins are inherently practical. They measure the expenditure of lives and resources against the potential yield of a territory.
And the URSR's casualty rates must be staggering.
The energy requirements alone to maintain planetary shields, supply lines, and weapons manufacturing across 4 entirely different strategic doctrines is mathematically unsustainable. It completely defies the sunk cost fallacy.
No matter how much they have invested in these hold worlds, the cost of staying is demonstrably higher.
But they don't leave. They dig deeper. And that brings us to the most fascinating part of this dynamic, which is the outside perspective.
Yeah, let's talk about what the rest of the galaxy thinks. Because the other Leagues of Kin are looking at the URSR and asking that exact same question. Like, why are you staying?
And the URSR's response is just an impenetrable wall of silence.
They offer absolutely zero military or strategic justification for their stubbornness. When pressed by other leagues, the URSR's only public defense, their only official diplomatic statement, is the assertion that their ancestors would abandon them should they retreat.
Which is a heavy statement.
Now, for a human, saying my ancestors would be disappointed is a poetic metaphor.
Yeah.
But for the kin, it is a literal, biological, and spiritual death sentence. The ancestors are the Votans, the massive ancient supercomputers that hold the uploaded consciousness, the clone skein genetic data, and the accumulated wisdom of their entire race.
To be abandoned by the ancestors means your genetic line ceases to exist. It means your soul, your memories have nowhere to go when you die. It is the ultimate existential terror.
But the URSR refuses to elaborate on the mechanics of why a tactical retreat would cause this abandonment. They don't explain the logic.
And because nature abhors a vacuum, the other leagues of kin have filled that silence with their own theory.
Oh yeah, the rumor mill is churning.
The speculation from the outside is incredibly revealing, not about the URSR, but about the cultural biases of the other kin.
Right, because the outside theories are essentially just the other leagues projecting their own cultural baggage onto the situation.
Exactly. The first major theory floating around kin society is that the URSR are bound by rash grudges sworn by their forebears.
We know the kin hold grudges like no one else in the galaxy.
Oh, they elevate it to an art form. If you wrong them, they write it down in their genetic memory, and they will hunt you for 3,000 years.
So the theory goes that some ancient URSR ancestors swore a blood oath to hold this specific patch of dirt, and now the current generation is trapped by their own cultural legalism.
It's a theory based on a known cultural trait taken to a pathological extreme. But the second theory is even more dismissive, really.
What's that one?
Many in the broader kin society believe the URSR are simply too proud to admit they made a terrible strategic error.
So it's just an ego thing.
That's the assumption. The idea is that their holdings are practically worthless. The mining veins are tapped out. But their leadership is so violently stubborn that their egos won't let them order a retreat. They are bleeding their own people dry just to save face on a galactic scale.
Honestly, both of those theories sound like massive cope from the other leagues.
They really do.
It feels like the rest of kin society simply cannot fathom a level of dedication that overrides pure pragmatism, so they have to invent these petty, dismissive reasons to explain it away, like, oh, they're just being dramatic about a grudge, or, oh, they just have big egos.
It's easier to write them off as crazy than to accept there might be a real reason.
But look at the reality. You do not fight a forefront war against nesting Tyranids and a newly awakened Necron dynasty just to protect your ego. It doesn't make mechanical sense.
It doesn't. And what makes the URSR so chilling is their complete lack of response to these accusations.
Right, they just don't care.
The historical records are very clear on this point. The kin of the URSR give absolutely no outward sign that they care what the rest of their race thinks of them.
Let's really analyze that psychology. The kin are inherently social creatures within their clone skeins. They rely on the collective for survival and validation.
Very much so.
So to completely sever your entire culture from the need for external validation from your own species is a mark of singular, almost terrifying focus. It's not just that they politely disagree with the other leagues, it's that the opinions of the outside universe do not even register as static on their communication arrays.
They are entirely monolithically interdirected. And the reason they are so insulated, the reason they do not bother to correct the other leagues or dispel the theories about grudges and pride, is entirely practical.
It's all about the secret.
Yes. The wall of silence isn't arrogance. It is an absolute non-negotiable security protocol. Because if the other leagues, or worse, the Imperium or the Hive Mind, found out what was actually at the geographic center of URSR territory, the current forefront war would seem like a gentle disagreement.
Everyone would converge on them. The rest of the galaxy thinks they are defending worthless rocks. But the truth is physical. It is unimaginably ancient. And it is buried right at the heart of their space.
This is the big reveal.
This is where we pull back the curtain on the deepest secret of the Urani Surtur regulates. Let's talk about what happens when you bypass the Necron lines, slip past the Orc fleets, evade the Tyranid capillary towers, and actually reach the core system of the URSR.
At the center of their heavily fortified territory lies a system containing an artificial world.
Now, mega engineering is common in the 40K universe, right? But this is not a standard orbital habitat or a hollowed-out asteroid.
No, this is different. This artificial world has been painstakingly grown and constructed around a singular, impossibly precious artifact. It's a truly ancient kin vessel dating back to the first ancestors' migration.
For a kin, the first ancestors' migration isn't just history. It is Genesis. It is the mythological era when the original generation of clones left their ancient homeworld and ventured into the crushing gravity of the galactic core.
It's basically their origin story.
Finding an intact ship from that era is like a modern human finding the actual physical Noah's Ark, completely preserved, with all the original blueprints for human civilization inside. The ship itself is a holy relic of unfathomable value. But the URSR didn't just build a planet around an empty ship.
The vessel is merely the reliquary. The true prize the secret they are bleeding for slumbers inside it.
The core itself.
It is a Votan ancestor core.
Hmm.
But this is not a standard core. It is an entity so ancient and so singular that the URSR Grimmirs, their psychic and spiritual engineers, have given it a unique designation. They call it the Somnant.
The sleeping god.
Yeah, and the implications of the Somnant are mind-bending. There are records indicating that another ancestor core in the URSR's possession, one that is semi-lucid and constantly glitching, managed to parse enough data to suggest something incredible about the Somnant.
What did it find?
It suggested that the Somnant might not just be an early ancestor core. It might be one of the first ancestors. It might even be the Votan itself.
The prime consciousness. The original operating system from which all other kin and all other Votan descended.
Exactly. The sheer gravity of that possibility cannot be overstated.
Because the central crisis facing the Leagues of Votan in the 41st millennium is that their ancestor cores are failing, right?
They're slowly breaking down. For thousands of years, billions upon billions of kin have died, and their memories, experiences, and data have been uploaded into these cores.
It's like a hard drive that's just totally full.
Exactly. The cores are suffering from catastrophic computational bloat. They are senile. If a kin asks a Votan a question about how to build a specific plasma reactor, it might take the core 300 years to filter through the billions of irrelevant memories just to output the schematic.
Which isn't great when you have orcs at the door.
Not at all. But the Somnant has been asleep. It went dormant at the very beginning of the migration.
Which means its databanks are exactly as they were during the peak of their civilization.
Yes, it possesses knowledge that is completely uncluttered by the millennia of kin minds that have been absorbed by every other Votan.
Uncluttered knowledge from the dark age of technology, undiluted STC schematics, flawless genetic templates that haven't suffered thousands of years of clone skein degradation.
If the Somnant could be accessed, it could instantly restore the kin to an unparalleled pinnacle of technological and biological supremacy.
It would provide the weaponry to obliterate the Necrons, the genetic defenses to render the Tyranids harmless, and the strategic algorithms to outmaneuver the Imperium.
It is the ultimate galaxy-altering prize.
Which brings us to the tragic irony, the massive, heartbreaking twist of the knife that defines the URSR. They have the hard drive containing the cure to every disease in the galaxy, the blueprints for absolute salvation, and they have lost the password.
It is incredibly bleak. The URSR has entirely lost the means to awaken the Somnant. If they ever possessed the correct protocols in the first place, they're gone now.
They are guarding the ultimate prize, but it is locked behind a digital and spiritual firewall they cannot breach.
Let's really sit with the existential dread of that mechanism for a second. How does a Grimnir actually try to interface with a dormant god machine that predates their entire known history?
I mean, they're basically guessing, right?
They are essentially brute forcing a decryption on a biological supercomputer. They stand in the presence of the Somnant, and they attempt random invocations.
Answering passwords.
Yes. They input ancient dialects, forgotten subroutines, psychic key codes, just praying that they hit the exact combination of syntax and intent that will cause the machine to boot up.
And every time they fail, which has been every day for thousands of years, they have to walk out of that sanctum and look up at a sky choked with orc scrap ships and Tyranid bioplasma.
The psychological weight is crushing. The myth of Sisyphus is really the only adequate comparison.
They are pushing a boulder up a hill, watching it roll back down, but they cannot stop pushing because that boulder contains the salvation of their species.
It makes their earlier statement to the other leagues, that the ancestors would abandon them, take on a terrifyingly literal meaning.
Right, because if they retreat, they are physically leaving the original ancestor behind to be consumed by the Tyranids or dismantled by the Necrons.
They can't do it.
But my question to you is about the psychology of the commanders. Is it actually hope that keeps them manning the walls, or is it just the paralyzing fear of sunk cost?
It's a blurry line at this point.
Because if they leave now, they admit that billions of kin died over thousands of years for absolutely nothing. They are trapped by the sheer volume of their own spilled blood.
It is inextricably linked. The hope of waking the Somnant is the only thing that justifies the sunk cost. To abandon it is to declare that their entire civilization, their entire historical record, is a chronicle of futile suffering.
And because they cannot abandon it, they have to continually restructure their entire society to support this endless grinding siege. Guarding a sleeping god while fighting 4 apocalyptic wars requires the total, uncompromising mobilization of every single resource.
Which naturally dictates the physical reality of how they live. because the Somnant's artificial world
Yeah.
and the massive orbital defense grids required to protect it draw unimaginable amounts of power.
Oh, the power drain must be insane.
You can't run a planetary shield capable of deflecting a Necron Tachyon arrow without bleeding your civilian energy grids dry. And that creates the deeply dystopian ascetic sacrifice of the URSR's domestic culture.
The domestic life of a URSR kin is one of absolute enforced deprivation. They have sacrificed every conceivable comfort purely for the mechanics of survival.
We are not talking about rationing luxury goods here. Every kindred within the URSR is born into, lives, and dies in an environment with the absolute bare minimum of food, light, air, and heat.
Let's break down the physical reality of that. Think about the energy deficit. If you divert 99% of a whole world's geothermal energy to the heavy plasma batteries on the surface, the subterranean cities go dark.
You have generations of kin living in perpetually freezing temperatures. Their clone skeins have likely adapted over millennia to endure localized hypothermia as a baseline state of being.
The lighting is permanently reduced to emergency lumens, casting the entirety of their civilization in long, oppressive shadows.
But the most horrifying detail is the air.
The air recyclers. That part is so grim.
The atmospheric recyclers are throttled down to the lowest possible output to save energy. The air they breathe is stale, overcycled, and constantly heavy, with the metallic tang of machinery and the claustrophobic scent of millions of bodies packed into unventilated spaces.
They're physically starving their own brains of oxygen just to ensure the anti-aircraft guns can track orc fighters.
Exactly. You are freezing in the dark, breathing recycled smog, and eating heavily synthesized nutrient paste. Also, a soldier on the wall can fire one more shot.
And the sheer utilitarian cruelty of it is that despite these horrific conditions, the URSR demands that its people maintain as large a population as biologically possible.
Because they need bodies. A forefront war of attrition demands a constant, unrelenting stream of recruits to feed into the meat grinder.
They are deliberately overpopulating environments that are deliberately starved of resources.
It creates a pressure cooker environment where individual comfort is literally a crime against the state. If you find a way to make your hablock a few degrees warmer, you are stealing joules of energy from the void shield.
You are functionally committing treason just by trying not to freeze. The shared trauma of this existence forms the bedrock of their culture. But even with maximum birth rates, fighting orcs and tyranids depletes your numbers fast.
Very fast.
They need outside help, which introduces the deeply paranoid process of admitting new kindreds into the League.
The URSR does accept outside kindreds, but the admission process is shrouded in intense secrecy. It happens infrequently, and it involves rigorous, highly classified tests and clandestine meetings.
Which makes mechanical sense, right? You are guarding the original Votan. You cannot risk a gene stealer cult infiltrating your ranks, or an Imperial spy slipping in.
Or even just a kin from another league who might blab about the Somnant to the wider galaxy. You have to vet them for ideological purity.
But the intelligence gathered on this process features a detail that is incredibly sinister. And it's a verified fact. No kindred has ever left the URSR once admitted. 0% attrition.
The geopolitical analysts who study the URSR actively question the mechanics of this 0% departure rate. They ask whether it is born out of absolute, unshakable loyalty forged in the dark, or if it is enforced by, quote, some more sinister reason.
I'm going to push back incredibly hard on the noble loyalty idea here. If you invite a group of refugees into your freezing, dark, starving subterranean fortress, make them swear a blood oath, and then not a single one of them is ever seen leaving again.
He doesn't look good.
That is not a military alliance. That is a hostage situation. That is a generational prison.
In the context of the URSR's precarious existence, the line between a disciplined society and a hyper-militarized death cult is practically non-existent.
What do you think the sinister reason actually is?
Consider the mechanics of their security grid. It is highly probable that once an outsider is admitted, their biometric and clone skein data is permanently hardwired into the planetary defense architecture.
So they literally can't leave.
They're chemically or neurologically bound to the whole world. Or, on a more brutal level, the URSR simply executes anyone who attempts to request a departure visa. Desertion is an existential threat when every calorie of heat is accounted for.
Imagine the claustrophobic horror of that realization. You are an outside kin, your mining fleet was destroyed, you seek refuge with the URSR.
You're just looking for a safe harbor.
Right. You pass their secret tests, you walk into the dimly lit, freezing halls, the heavy vault doors seal shut behind you, and you slowly realize that you have just condemned yourself and every generation of your clones that follows to an eternity of freezing in the dark while serving a comatose god.
You are never seeing the stars again.
It is a terrifying psychological trap, but it is exactly this pressure cooker environment, this inescapable shared suffering, that produces a very specific, terrifying kind of combatant.
You do not live your entire life in the freezing dark, dedicating every breath you take to a secret duty, without it fundamentally altering how you conduct warfare.
Exactly. Let's look at their combat doctrine, which is defined by what we can only call grim endurance. How does a culture of absolute ascetic sacrifice translate to the battlefield?
Well, first of all, they are ferociously loyal to one another. And you can see exactly why. When you have spent your entire life sharing half rations of nutrient paste in a freezing bunker with someone, the bond you form is unbreakable.
You aren't just fighting for your commanding officer. You are fighting for the only other person in the universe who understands your specific hell.
That shared trauma creates a phalanx of warriors who fundamentally refuse to countenance defeat or despair. Despair is a luxury they stripped from their genome 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, you just don't have time for it.
Furthermore, they harbor an absolute visceral disdain for their foes.
Think about the psychology there. You are a URSR warrior. You have given up sunshine, fresh air, and warmth your entire life for a holy, terrible duty.
And then you look across the trench and you see a horde of orc freebooters who are just there to smash things, steal scrap, and have a good time.
The rage must be astronomical. You don't just want to tactically defeat the orcs. You despise them on a molecular level for forcing you to expend your precious, hoarded ammunition on their frivolity.
This specific psychological profile, the absolute refusal to die, and the bitter resentment of the enemy, is translated brilliantly into the actual mechanics of the tabletop game.
I love when the lore matches the rules.
It is one of those rare instances where the lore and the rule set are perfectly synergistic. The URSR utilize a unique stratagem called Waste Not Your Last Breath.
That is easily one of the most evocative names for a rule I've ever heard. Waste not your last breath. How does it actually function mechanically?
On the tabletop, the stratagem allows a URSR character who has been destroyed by an enemy attack to immediately fight back or shoot back before they are finally removed from the battlefield.
They intercept their own death.
Exactly. They pause it just long enough to inflict one final casualty and then expire.
I want to visualize what that actually looks like in the mud and the blood of the battlefield. Let's look at it from the perspective of a Black Templar.
Okay, set the scene.
You are a genetically enhanced super soldier. You charge a URSR trench line. You hit a kin commander square in the chest with a mass reactive bolter round. The round detonates.
Devastating damage.
The kin's armor breaches, their internal organs are pulverized. By every metric of biology, physics, and logic, that combatant is dead. They drop into the mud. You turn your back to engage the next target, assuming the threat is neutralized.
But the threat is not neutralized.
Because behind you, fueled by sheer, unadulterated spite, religious fervor, and a lifetime of being told that every ounce of energy must be spent, that clinically dead URSR commander drags themselves up out of the mud.
Their clone's gain pushes one final surge of adrenaline through their ruptured heart.
They raise their plasma pistol, lock onto the back of your power armor, and pull the trigger, vaporizing you both in a final act of mutually assured destruction.
The psychological impact of that doctrine on the enemy cannot be overstated. The orcs, the Tyranids, the Imperium, they surround the URSR, they outnumber them, they assume they are the besiegers dictating the terms of the war.
But when the defenders physically refuse to die when killed, the dynamic flips.
The URSR become the boogeymen of their own siege. They are a terrifying anomaly that cannot be quantified by normal military algorithms.
They are the ultimate horror movie monsters to their enemies, and their visual identity perfectly reinforces this grim utilitarian terror.
When you see them on the field, there is no flashy heraldry. There is no gold trim to denote vanity or personal glory.
They wear deeply utilitarian dark and light green armor. Green, traditionally the color of endurance, stoicism, and military camouflage.
It is entirely Spartan. Their faction symbol is simply a large, blocky green R placed above a smaller Stark inscription that reads UR.S.
It looks less like a noble crest and more like a stamped serial number on a piece of industrial mining equipment.
It reflects a society that has stripped away art, individual expression, and ego, leaving nothing but the raw, mechanical function of defense. They wear their generational burden like armor.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today, and the mechanical reality of the URSR is just staggering. We've broken down the logistical impossibility of their forefront war against the galaxy's worst nightmares.
The Necrons, the Orcs, the Tyranids, the Imperium.
We've examined the psychological fortress of their silence against the judgment of their peers. We've unlocked the tragic, heavily encrypted secret of the Somnet buried in its artificial world.
And we felt the freezing, claustrophobic reality of their domestic life and seen the horrifying, spiteful resilience they unleash in combat.
When you synthesize all these elements, the core thesis of the Urani Surtur Regulates becomes clear. Their story is not a triumphant narrative of glory.
No, it is not a tale of shining heroes holding back the dark to the applause of the galaxy. It is the story of a tireless, utterly thankless vigil.
They embody the darkest truth of this universe. That hope, when taken to its absolute extreme, becomes a heavy, rusted chain.
They have accepted an eternity of brutal war, paranoid secrecy, and starving asceticism to protect a power they may never, ever be able to use.
They are guarding a beacon of infinite light in a universe of darkness, but they are forced to keep the beacon turned off so the monsters don't see it.
That's a haunting way to phrase it, but it's completely accurate.
I want you listening to think about the weight of keeping a secret like that. Think about the times in your own life you've had to endure something difficult, something grinding, without any recognition or applause.
True endurance doesn't happen on a stage.
Exactly. It happens in the dark, fueled entirely by your own internal conviction that what you are doing matters. The URSR take that deeply relatable human experience and stretch it across thousands of years, billions of lives, and the cold vacuum of space. They endure because they fundamentally believe they must.
It is a self-imposed crucifixion that defines their entire species' existence. The tragedy is profound, but the mechanical and spiritual resilience required to maintain it is undeniably awe-inspiring.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Something that builds on the mechanics of the ancestor cores we've analyzed, but opens a new and frankly terrifying philosophical door.
Where are we going with this?
We talked extensively about how the Somnant is uncluttered, it is pure, it hasn't absorbed the millennia of trauma, compromise, and grimdark reality that has shaped the modern kin.
Right. It is the first ancestor frozen in an age of reason, science, and relative optimism.
The pure, uncorrupted prime consciousness of their genesis. So let's play this out. Let's say tomorrow a Grimnir gets lucky, the millionth random invocation finally clicks.
The digital tumblers align.
The ancient machinery deep within the artificial world hums to life, the ice thaws, the blast doors open, and the Somnant wakes up. The URSR has achieved their ultimate victory.
The salvation of their race.
But is it? Think about the computational perspective of that machine. What happens when this pure, uncluttered God computer, which went to sleep during a golden age of exploration, opens its digital eyes and runs a diagnostic on the current state of its children?
Oh.
What happens when it looks at the Urani Surtur Regulates? It will see a paranoid, freezing, starving, hyper-militarized death cult that feeds its own people into a meat grinder, that executes anyone trying to leave, that strips its clones of art and comfort just to keep the lights off.
That is a staggering implication. The cultural divergence would be absolute.
What if the pure God looks at the grim, dark reality of the kin, processes the sheer, unadulterated horror of what they have become in its name, and is so disgusted by their regression that it actively rejects them?
What if it determines that this survival is not worth the moral cost?
The idea that their ultimate salvation might look at their 10,000-year sacrifice and calculate it as an abomination.
That is just bleak.
What if the real tragedy of the URSR isn't that they can't wake the Somnant? What if the tragedy is that waking it would mathematically prove that their entire way of life, their endless, starving, silent siege, was a massive, unforgivable mistake?
Goes back to your caretaker analogy.
Think back to the caretaker in our crumbling fortress. What happens when the owner finally returns, looks at the boarded-up windows, the freezing, starving caretaker, the decades of wasted life, and just says, "Why didn't you just leave? The house was fully insured."
A truly haunting mechanism to ponder, and a perfectly fitting end to an exploration of one of the most intractably tragic factions in the 41st millennium.
Thank you for taking this deep dive into the darkness with us today. Keep asking questions, keep looking for the truth in the shadows, and we'll see you next time.